Chapter 50. Caleb pressed his ear against the door. Along with the desperate shriek of the bell, the floor and ceiling pulsed with a fiery light. "Absalom, get ready to run!"
"Where to?"
The younger prince squeezed his hands together, his face shedding color. "To the army! To anyone on our side!" Caleb's hand slipped to his sword hilt. How arrogant had he been to be alone now, just because everyone said he needed not to be? He gulped. Had he endangered his brother? The door exploded inward. Caleb froze. He couldn't move, even though he screamed at his hands and feet to respond. Finally, his breath fell back into rhythm. "Who are you?" "Don't you recognize your death?" the Kelin snarled. "I am Vlad." Vlad. He wondered if Anthros had told him where they were. "I am this." The Kelin limped inside, his sword point dragging along the stone floor as he stepped forward. Caleb realized he was retreating, and he tripped over Anthros's corpse. He felt Absalom's hands against his back as he stumbled. His brother's elbows rammed into his ribs as the younger elf tried to catch him from falling. Absalom yelled,
"They're coming to save us!"
Caleb gripped his sword as he regained his balance, but he didn't think he could draw it in time. "Yes, they are," the Kelin replied in a calm voice that betrayed none of the wildness sprinting across his face. The prince noticed Vlad clutching a piece of mirror in his other hand. "Do you think they'll be quick enough to save your hides?" He swung the sword's tip up and jerked forward another step. "Your hides. I think I will skin you." The Kelin's eyes refocused. "No, Vlad, just kill them and we can escape. I still need my victory. Be silent. You will listen to me, for I am your king." The Storm Reader barked a laugh. "Now? Right now you finally wish to order me around? Yes, you've gone too far. Kill them and go, or we're both going to die."
"What's happening?"
Absalom whispered, his breath hot on his brother's ear. Caleb shook his head. His hand inched his sword free of its sheath. The Kelin continued to stare into space. The prince lunged. Vlad, or Dis, parried with snake speed, putting their sword in place like a divining rod. Caleb tried to determine the rhythm of the fight. It changed instantly. Slow, fast, fast, slow, 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 fast, slow, fast. He couldn't figure out how quick the next thrust would be, and he nearly missed several parries as he weaved sideways to try to create more space. He knew he would already be dead if someone had not previously wounded the Storm Reader. The Kelin dropped his point, dodged the prince's following swipe, and cut the elf on the knee. Caleb crashed to the floor. The Kelin raised his sword, and the elf barely brought his over his head in time. The Storm Reader forced his blade all the way down to the top of the prince's skull. Absalom pushed himself off the wall, and Caleb caught the glimmer of light coming from his fingertips. Fire sparked between his brother's palms. The Kelin dropped the mirror fragment. Before it had even passed his waist, he grasped a knife from his belt and threw it. The black mirror shattered against the floor as the Kelin swung. The knife scraped across Absalom's forehead. The younger prince yelped and stumbled into the wall next to the window. The light in his hands flashed away into smoke. Vlad paused. "Where did you get that?" Caleb took a fraction of a second to glance at the crown. "I know I already stole it." He eased back his sword a fraction. "Oh well." He thrust. "Run!" Caleb yelled, his sword flying to counter the Kelin's blade as he pushed himself to stand. "Absalom, run!" He threw his whole weight into his next attack, barreling into the Kelin's blade. He beat aside the sword, but he riposted into nothing more than shadow. He parried wildly, but the Kelin's sword cut his shoulder. Absalom dove through the open doorway.
"Help! Help! Alarm!"
Caleb swiveled his blade around the sword, trying to cut underneath it, but to no avail. He couldn't land a strike. After a furious minute, the prince's sword flew free from his grip. It rebounded off a wall and landed on Anthros's body. Caleb dodged the Kemen's next attack to the side, banging his head against the inside of the windowsill. He cried aloud as he propped himself up, gripping the sill's edges. "Your army is run off or dead!" The Storm Reader's expression melted into a stiff smile. "It doesn't matter who perishes. The Kemen survive." The prince stretched out a hand toward the crown. The gems reflected the lightning's unsteady light. "Even you? What if you die?" "Even me." The Kemen shrugged. "Am I talking to Vlad or Dis?" He shrugged again. "Does it matter?" Caleb laughed. He pulled the smooth side of the crown to his chest and laughed again. He could tell by the Kemen's face that the Storm Reader was as surprised as he was. "You never understood immortality." The Kemen scowled and dangled the sword tip in front of the prince. "Oh, we do. It's the natural ascension of our race. Now we rule Darkreign, and soon this world. There will be another chance for us." While he laughed, tears slipped free from the corners of Caleb's eyes. "No, you don't. Being immortal is being an individual. And I refuse to believe you when you say it doesn't matter if you die, either of you, because you've been immortal too long." He cradled the crown. "And you killed my parents!" The Kemen smirked at the elf. Yes, we did. You know they let us. No fight, no fun." Caleb felt his saliva burning in his mouth and his breath singeing his throat. "And how many other people have you stolen from me?" A figure appeared in the doorframe. Orange eyes focused on the prince. The newcomer held a black sword in his hand. "Help us!" Dis screamed. Caleb held his breath, but Thistle shook his head. "That's my sword! That's my sword!" Vlad struck in an overreaching thrust. "You Thistle parried the clumsy strike. The blades did not ring out. Caleb stared in amazement as the two began a furious dance with no accompanying music. The Kemen leader dropped his point and scrambled backward. Thistle held the sword still as the other cried out, "You're one of us and you're saving an elf? You know what they did to us." "Not to me, Dis. But you're one of us. There are no Kemen traitors." "Then I'm not a Kemen. I remember being human. And I bet you do too, somewhere in there." The other Kemen's face twisted. "My sword!" Even wounded, he held his own. Behind them, Caleb pushed himself up against the wall, still clutching the crown to his chest. He watched the combatants in a daze. Vlad disengaged his sword and slipped it underneath the black blade, swinging it back and forth before thrusting, while Thistle tried to parry each swing. He moved Vlad's blade to the side, but not far enough. The sword dug deep into his pelvis. "No!" the prince yelled. Thistle collapsed, dropping the silent sword. He clutched at his hip and his chest heaved. The standing Storm Reader spun to the prince and smiled. Caleb froze. The Kemen jerked toward the black sword, then stopped. "Enough of this, Vlad. Kill them, and then we have to go. Can you hear me? You can make yet another one." The Kemen glanced at the open door, but he whirled back to Caleb and sauntered forward. "You, boy, have been more trouble than you're worth." He thrust. Caleb jumped to the side. "Hold still!" Then he screamed, "This, shut up!" The Kemen lunged again, lurching forward while he argued. "Vlad, no!" But the Storm Reader had fully extended his arm and blade, and the elf was inside his reach. Caleb rose and slammed the crown with its spiked points into the Storm Reader's neck. The Kemen tried to inhale and staggered backward. Caleb jerked the crown back and smashed it into the Storm Reader's face. The Kemen sank to the floor. His torn expression contorted and softened as his body slackened. Caleb wrenched the crown free. His heart was beating fast enough to explode, but his fingers weren't shaking as he rested the bloody thing on his head. That white-hot moment churned with glory and vengeance, but it slipped away from him. He braced himself on the wall, reeling from sudden dizziness. Movement exploded from the doorway. Jacob stood over the dead Kelin, axe ready. More elves rushed to Thistle, who was writhing on the floor. "Not him!" Caleb's sight blurred as he sagged against the wall and exhaled. He forced himself to look up and see who had arrived. Distantly, he heard Jacob bellowing, "Did you have to run all the way from the courtyard? What took you—" His voice faded as Caleb tried to concentrate on his vision. The knight captain, Dare, Kelin, Thalin, 2 dwarves. He blinked in surprise, one of whom must have decided that the beard was just too much, and several elven soldiers clustered in the door. Thalin dashed toward his father. Everyone else hovered away from him.
Dad!
Thalin tripped over Thistle as he embraced him. The Storm Reader pushed himself up and winced. He wrapped an arm around his son, and Caleb felt a stab of loss. He'd never have that affection again. He whirled back to the others. "Is Alsalon safe?" "Yes," Jacob replied immediately. Caleb looked at Thistle. "Help him," he swallowed. "That's an order." He listened to his breath rattle in and out of his mouth. He stared. "Dare, why do you have a sword with Palin's art on it?" She met his gaze. "Caleb, why are you wearing a bloody crown?" Thalin pointed.
It's dripping.
The prince lifted the crown from his head. He brought it to eye level and stared at it. He caught Jacob's nod of approval at him. "Caleb," Dare began. The prince shook his head. "No. Call me Eidolon. I think I've earned the name my parents gave me."